Welcome, everyone, to the March edition of Conversations with Archbishop Kurtz. And welcome, Archbishop.
Thanks, Brian. It's good to be here right in the middle of Lent.
Yeah, we have another great show for you today. We're going to talk about Lent in just a few minutes. But first, we're going to talk about your trip you made back at the end of January to Vietnam.
Right.
And then we always have a special guest, and this time it's going to be Carol Goodwin, our soon-to-be departing director of Youth and Young Adult
22
Ministry.
years she served with us. She's been great.
Yeah. So let's start. Let's make it about Vietnam, this segment here. When you were president of the Bishops' Conference for 3 years, you got to go to lots of places, and in a sense, this was the tail end of that responsibility, right?
It was.
And so what was the purpose of the trip?
Yeah. Well, as you said it rightly, that one of the purposes of our Bishops' Conference is to be in interaction and support of Episcopal conferences in other parts of the world, and especially where we think we can be of some help and assistance. So I began actually a dialogue with the leadership of Vietnam, the Episcopal Conference of Vietnam. Believe it or not, it was the day after Pope Francis left Philadelphia.
Okay.
If you remember, when he came to the United States, we had wonderful pastoral visit, and then at the end of World Meeting of Families, I stayed one more day in Philadelphia, and a number of the bishops from Vietnam who came for World Meeting of Families, they stayed also. So we had a dialogue. It was kind of fostered by what's called a Federation of Vietnamese Priests. There's 900 priests throughout the United States in that federation, all from Vietnam and all serving within the United States. So we began a dialogue, and it culminated in my visit, now with the approval and support of Cardinal DiNardo, who's our new president of the Bishops' Conference, and I think a very fruitful one. 3 days in traveling, 6 days on the ground, 5 cities. So I saw a lot of Vietnam in those 5-6 days.
Now, most Americans, and certainly most people in our diocese, including myself, honestly, don't know a lot of the geography of Vietnam. So maybe you don't have to name all the cities, but a little bit where you went.
It's shaped like an S. Most people know Saigon, which is now Ho Chi Minh City, which is toward the south. And that was the first place that I was. I was also in a place called Hue, which is another archdiocese and very historic. I was in Hanoi, and most people know Hanoi. Sure. That's the oldest archdiocese, and was there for their New Year's Eve Mass, which was called Tet. The end of January happened to be their New Year's celebration. Let me check this. Chúc Mừng Năm Mai. That says
translate.
That says Happy New Year in bad Vietnamese. And then finally, after a visit to Xuan Loc, which is the 4th city, we were in Vinh, and that's where we have a twinning relationship, as you know, with our seminarians.
Sure. Now, you know, when you first go to a country, I'm sure you've had this a number of times. You develop some impressions, and some are probably corrections of things you didn't know or wondered about. Some early impressions of your visit?
Yeah, some of them I think confirmed a situation. You know, I was involved with the receiving of Vietnamese refugees back in 1975. I was
in Pennsylvania.
In Pennsylvania. Yeah. So I've had a connection for 40 years, to be honest. And one of the things I knew is the Vietnamese church is a church suffering. It has, since 1975, struggled. The freedom has gradually become greater, and I guess the trust with the government, which is a communist government, they still need permission for virtually everything. They're able to worship and have parishes, and the Pope assigns the bishops, and many of the things show great efforts of freedom. But and so because of that, the church also has, I would say, is thriving. There were priests I met, Brian, who finished their priestly preparation in the late 70s, but they didn't get permission to get ordained until the mid-90s.
Wow.
Believe it or not.
That's a long.
There still is not permission to open a Catholic school or a Catholic hospital. There's permission for preschool and in kindergarten, and there's permission for clinics. So it's just gradually going. And one of the reasons I went was this year, very surprisingly in many ways, the church received permission to begin what they call the Catholic Institute of Vietnam, which eventually will become the Catholic University of Vietnam.
So even under the restrictions, I guess you call it, or the limitations the government has on it, you use the thriving, vitality.
In many ways there is, and that's true really of a suffering church, isn't it? That when the church is suffering, often people appreciate what maybe we take for granted within the United States. The Mass that I had at a shrine of St. Anthony, I preached at it. I was privileged to preach at it and had a good translator. Had 20,000 people coming to that Mass, and it was somewhat in the middle of nowhere. Yeah. And yet people came, great enthusiasm, great participation. The people at Sunday Masses that I was part of, they all sang, they all were involved, the children were involved. I really have to say the participation was really at a high level.
I guess one more time, how God blesses particularly the missionary church that's out there. That's right. Very good. Let's talk about the Dawson connection. You said you got to visit the Diocese of Vinh, and we have 4 seminarians connected with there.
Very importantly, I met the families of each of our 4 seminarians.
Oh, wow.
And I was at the home of 2, and then in some cases, the other family members actually came to the shrine of St. Anthony that I just mentioned.
Sure.
So I think that was good. And I also had a good chance with Father Anthony. By the way, Father Anthony Chen, our own priest here at St. John Vianney, was the official translator and guide. And boy, if you ever have to go to Vietnam, take him with you. Make sure he goes. He's really good. So we visited the mother house of the Sister Servants of Jesus Christ, the High Priest. As you know, we opened a convent this past year, and there are 4 sisters serving the parishioners of not only of St. John Vianney, but also are getting involved, I think, in some of the schools.
So with 4 seminarians from Vinh and the sisters from Vietnam, and of course we have a few Vietnamese priests in our diocese too. So this partnership, you think it's an ongoing partnership?
It is, and it's part of a desire for mutuality.
Okay.
How do we get to know each other? How do we get to know the local church? Where we're in partnership, and how do they get to know us? And I think in so doing, we build the universality. We build the body of Christ, if you would, that doesn't know boundaries, that reaches out to others.
Very good.
It's enriching.
That must be. Is that unique in the country to have that kind of? Do lots of dioceses have?
Well,
this?
you know what? Everybody has their own relationship. Of course, we all brag as if we have the best.
Of course,
naturally.
We know that.
Naturally, but I think it's a very healthy thing what we've been doing in the Archdiocese to be very intentional about the mutuality or the reciprocity that involves that we get engaged in the life. I'll be going to Vietnam, I think, again next year.
Good for you. Yeah. Good for you. Yeah. Well, thanks for this update. That must have been a fascinating trip
really
of all your travels, and then thanks for updating us, and also for witnessing and building that relationship, because that's pretty special. Very good. And thanks to you for being with us for this segment. We'll be back in just a few minutes with a special guest.